The Thing Under the Bed, and the final stories to read to The Thing Under the Bed. Written by Winslow Swan. Audiobook narrated and produced by Edward James Beesley. Published by Winslow Swan. Buzzard.
I'm not ready to go yet.
Martha Adams sat on the back porch sipping her first cup of coffee of the morning, watching the two buzzards sitting in the palm tree that grew in her yard. She lit her cigarette and puffed madly, eyeing the two birds who in turn eyed her back.
No, I told you, I'm not ready to go yet.
She yelled again. As if in defiance, she took a long drag of the cigarette, holding it in her lungs as long as possible before blowing the white smoke upwards towards the birds. At 67, she felt that her health was pretty good considering everything that she had been through. 2 strokes, arthritis, and the general aches and pains that seemed to come with growing older had not hindered her in any way. She continued to be active in the small seaside community in South Florida, organizing and overseeing different events, including the Christmas light parade along the river. The restaurant that she had successfully run for almost 30 years was still going strong under the new owners, and she was paid a very handsome salary for consulting them. Yes, she thought to herself, her life was very good, and she was not ready to leave it behind. At least, not just now. She had seen the buzzards on other houses circling the yards as if waiting for a sign. Invariably, someone in the house would die. The buzzards would then move on, finding another house to roost on until the inevitable demise of someone inside. She finished her coffee and smashed the cigarette into the ashtray. Looking up into the palm trees, she counted 4 of the birds looking down at her.
I told you,
she yelled up at them.
I'm not ready yet.
Entering her Punta Gorda home, the cool air was a sharp contrast to the sunny and hot sky outside. It was December, but the temperatures had hovered in the 80s most of the month. The doorbell rang and she made her way through the house to find out who would be calling upon her at a little after 8 in the morning. She had no use for salespeople trying to sell magazines, vacuum cleaners, or worse, frozen meat from the back of a truck that wasn't quite frozen and definitely could not be considered meat. Opening the door slightly, she saw a tall young man with shoulder-length brown hair, slim and wearing something that resembled a suit.
May I help you?
She asked. Good morning, the young man said. I'm Frank Gibbons.
Is that supposed to mean something to me?
She asked. Well, I guess not, he admitted. I'm an investigative journalist for the Tampa Sun, and I was wondering if I could speak with you. She did not subscribe to any newspaper and had no way of knowing if this man standing on her porch at 8 in the morning was who he said he was. Asking for some sort of credentials would have been fruitless.
I don't understand why a reporter from a newspaper would want to speak to me, she told him.
To be honest, Frank began, I really am not sure why I would need to talk to you. All that I know is that I should talk to you.
Well, Mr. Gibbons,
she said as politely as she could without her second cup of coffee.
I'm very busy today, and I don't think that I have the time to discuss anything.
As she was closing the door, she stopped short with his next statement. It is about your buzzard problem, he called out to the closing door. She slowly opened the door again. May I come in? He asked. She opened the door wide and allowed the stranger to come into her home. She eyed him carefully, wondering if this was the man who would perhaps rob or kill her. She thought that maybe he would be the emissary that the buzzards were waiting for. Closing the door, she motioned him to sit in the small front room.
Would you like some coffee?
She asked.
That'd be very nice. I take it black, please.
After retrieving the 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen, she sat in the chair opposite the reporter.
And what would you like to know?
Martha asked him.
Well,
He said, a little embarrassed.
your name would be a good start.
She smiled and said,
Martha Adams, but just call me Martha. No Miss or Mrs., only Martha. Or perhaps Miss Martha.
Miss Martha,
he began.
what can you tell me about the buzzards?
I suppose you would better tell me what you know about them.
She said. His embarrassment grew as he said,
Well, I don't think that you're going to believe me, but the things that I've seen in the last few days defy any explanation.
What have you seen, young man?
Well, it all started about a week ago.
he began.
I was put on assignment down here to cover the Christmas holiday. You know the kind of thing, why tourists come here and what the locals do for the holidays. Basically a fill piece.
Oh, yes, I know,
She agreed.
Well, I was getting all the interviews that I would need when I first noticed the buzzards.
He said.
They were sitting on the roof of an elderly man who lived across the street from the people that I had done an interview with. Well, I was just getting ready to leave when I stopped and watched the old man come out of his house. Well, he was only wearing a bathrobe, which, isn't unusual in itself, especially for down this way. Anyway, I watched the man walk to the end of his driveway, about 100 feet or so. He turned and looked up at the buzzards, nodded his head, and,
At this point, the young reporter stopped his narrative and took a long sip of coffee, as if that would help his vocal cords work properly. Martha waited patiently, but she knew what he was about to tell her.
And what did you see?
She asked, coaxing him a little.
What I saw was like something out of a nightmare,
He told her.
Well, I watched this old man nod to the buzzards. There's about 6 of them all sitting on the roof of his house. There were several people on the streets, and apparently they did not see the same thing that I did. Well, I watched the buzzards swoop down and cover this old man like a pack of wolves, ripping and tearing at him. I saw them rip away chunks of meat as blood spurted across the driveway.
And what did everyone else see?
She asked him.
That's just it,
Frank said.
No one else seemed to see the same thing. The only thing that they saw was an old man fall to the ground. I found out later that he had died, according to the coroner, of heart failure. Simple, cut and dried heart failure. And that was not what I saw. I don't expect you to believe me, Mrs. Adams. I mean, Miss Martha.
He corrected himself.
No, young man.
She told him.
You would be surprised at what I would believe. Go on with your story.
A couple of days later,
Frank continued,
I was interviewing a young couple who had come to Florida on a vacation for Christmas. We were standing outside, relaxed and in a pretty good mood, when I noticed the first buzzard flying high overhead. I watched as it circled around before landing on the house next door to where I was. I was horrified to see at least 10 of the creatures sitting on the roof, looking down on the front yard. Well, I looked and saw a group of children playing. The couple that I was interviewing must have stopped talking and watched me looking at the kids playing, laughing, and basically just being children. Well, they smiled and began talking about how wonderful it was that the weather was so nice that the children could play outside. To my horror, I saw a boy about 10 years old stop in his tracks, turn to look up at the buzzards, nod, and then...
Again the reporter stopped talking. Martha reached over and lightly squeezed the young man's arm, a sign that she knew what he was about to say.
Well, the same thing happened,
he said after a moment.
The same horrible thing that had happened to the old man claimed the young boy. The buzzards were on him in seconds, tearing at the young flesh, blood splattering the other children. Well, I saw the couple hurry over to the decimated body and began performing CPR. Blood covering their clothes and faces. I wanted to stop them, but I couldn't.
Because no one else saw what you were seeing,
she said.
Exactly. No one saw the nightmare that I was witnessing. All they saw was a young boy collapsing onto the ground,
he said.
They, whoever they are, said that he had died from a brain aneurysm.
Would you like some more coffee or something a little stronger?
She asked.
No, coffee will be fine,
he told her, handing her his cup. She took the cups to the kitchen and looked out the window into her backyard. The buzzards, now about 5 or 6 of them, were roosting in the palm tree, watching her with baleful eyes. After pouring the coffee, she returned to the young man in her living room.
So, can you continue?
She asked.
I think I have to,
he told her, taking a sip of the hot liquid.
It was then,
he began again,
after the death of the boy, that I started to notice the buzzards more and more. Sometimes I would only see 1 or 2 of them sitting in a tree or on a rooftop. At other times I would see as many as 10 sitting on a house, as if waiting for some sort of signal.
The signal being that someone looks at them and nods,
she asked.
That was what seemed to happen to the old man and boy,
he explained.
I'm still trying to figure it all out.
Have you heard them?
She asked.
What do you mean?
They speak, you know,
she said.
It is almost like a whisper at first, but the voice becomes more distinct as time passes.
Frank looked hard at Martha.
Yes, I know,
she said, smiling.
You think now that I'm some crazy old woman who is beginning to show signs of senility. I promise you, they will start to whisper to you. So what brought you to me?
She asked.
Well, I started to follow the damn birds,
he said,
and they led me here.
I see,
she said.
On most of the homes I've seen 1 or 2. Where something has happened, I've seen as many as 10.
And, how many you seen on my roof?
She asked. He paused briefly before saying,
At least 30.
She smiled again, expecting the answer.
Why do I see the ghastly deaths is what I cannot understand,
Frank said, sipping at his coffee.
I believe you are seeing an ethereal world,
she explained.
You know that buzzards are basically scavengers picking at the dead animals that are killed on the roads. What I believe that you are seeing are the remnants of the soul that is being torn apart.
Do you think that the old man and the boy felt anything?
Frank asked.
I really don't know,
she told him.
But I have seen it happen as well.
When did you see it?
He asked.
A week ago, I watched the woman across the street do exactly as you described. The buzzards were on her in seconds, and I saw the same thing that you did,
she said.
I asked, and her family said that she had died of a heart attack, but I knew better.
So why do you think that I've seen this thing?
He asked.
Well, for myself, I think that I've been telling them for so long now that I wasn't ready. They showed me what was going to happen. As for you,
she paused and then said,
I believe that they are showing you because you were not supposed to see it. Now, you have been marked.
I feel fine,
he exclaimed.
And I don't have any health problems.
I don't think that has anything to do with it,
she said. Frank watched as she rose up and went to the back French doors leading to her backyard. Just beyond her, he could see the yard, and his terror began to rise. The entire yard was filled with buzzards, all of them watching the old woman.
Now,
she said to him, watching the buzzards closely.
Now I think that I am ready.
What are you talking about?
He asked. He watched in horror as she opened the door. The buzzards seemed to be waiting, their black eyes expectant as the old woman simply nodded her head. He screamed as the birds crowded into the house, ripping her apart as she fell to the floor. Blood began to splatter over the kitchen. He felt the warm liquid hit his face. A buzzard pecked and retrieved one of her eyes, gulping it down. Another one pulled at the tough heart muscle as blood began to cover the floor. One of the buzzards paused to look at Frank before attacking the woman's neck, pulling at the fragile skin and ripping into the carotid artery. The spray from the new wound spurted almost 5 feet and covered Frank with its inkiness. Within less than a minute, the birds were gone, and Martha was dead. The blood seemed to disappear from everything. Frank, in a daze, went to the phone and called the police. Driving back to Tampa, he was trying to get into his mind how he would write such a fantastic story. He knew that no one would ever believe it. His editor was furious at the length of time that he had been gone. He was even more upset when Frank told him that there really wasn't a story like he thought. As a reward, Frank was given the honor of covering some flower show. Eventually, he made it to his apartment, a sparsely furnished one-bedroom. He went over to the cabinet and removed the bottle of scotch that had been sitting for over 6 months since he had stopped drinking. Pouring a healthy glass, he went over to the window and looked out onto the city beneath his 15th floor apartment. The buzzard landed on the rail of his balcony and began to stare at him. Another one joined the first, flapping its dark wings. Frank raised his glass and said, "I'm not ready to go yet."
Epilogue. The butler did it.